This series of short videos is sponsored by the Kentucky Rifle Foundation to share the knowledge and research of select Kentucky Rifle Association members. This video was filmed at the 2024 Contemporary Long Rifle Association annual show in Lexington, Kentucky.
I guess I became interested in muzzleloading as a very youngster, watching TV, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, and the like. And from that, I was a hunter and fisherman, and one day coming out of the woods, I saw a fellow with a muzzleloading rifle, and I had never thought that those rifles were still available or were shootable, and that started my interest. And I found a local gunsmith and learned how to build rifles, and probably built around 20 rifles and pistols. But from about probably since 1980s, I've been collecting.
So what led you to go from wanting to use long rifles to wanting to collect them?
Well, I suppose it was my interest in history, because I really became more interested in history after lots of people at about 35 or 40. And so I realized there's a tremendous history behind the use of these rifles in colonial America, as well as through the wars. And so I began to collect as well as build, and I finally got to where I decided just to collect. And I got busier with family and children and the like.
What kept you coming back to them over the years?
Well, I think that once I fired a Flintlock and realized that the nostalgia, as well as the fact that they were really functioning firearms, then I was hooked, I guess you could say. And so I dropped all my modern firearms interest and switched just strictly to history and the muzzleloading firearms. And they had to be custom made. I wasn't interested in any production. So military never interested me, and none of the late 1800s or early 1900s, where they were actually producing them in quantity, I have no interest in those.
So what regions, schools, or eras have you focused on when it comes to your collecting?
Well, I'm from East Tennessee. I'm a native East Tennessean, and so when I found out there was a style and a tradition of gun making in my area, I checked into it, and I found out that I really liked the utilitarian style that they were, and the nostalgia around them being locally made and all. And so I picked Southern Mountain Rifles, and that's what my interest has been in collecting.
What are the most common characteristics of that school, and how do they evolve through their time periods?
The Southern Mountain Rifles are iron mounted, and that's because of the provenance and the prominence of iron in that area, and the bloomeries and iron industry that sprang up. And plus, early on, there wasn't good transportation of materials such as brass from Pennsylvania and all. So these were actually made from local materials, iron sheet, local wood, and folks that could do it all. And so common features are iron mounts, trigger guard, butt plate, and simple two-piece boxes made of iron. And then the rest of the rifle is fairly plain utilitarian, with simple 2, maybe 3 nose caps or ramrod furls, and then steel nose cap. And while maple was preferred, there's not the maple in the southern forest that there was in the northeastern forest. So as this wood disappeared, walnut replaced it. American walnut. So this is a rifle of about 1820 era, and this is a rifle of about 1860 era. And you can see the evolution of the thinner, smaller rifle, smaller caliber versus the larger rifle. And another thing that's unusual about the Southern Mountain Rifles is that they almost always have an unusually long tang. The tang will be extended. Very few mountain rifles will have short tangs. They'll all have extended tangs, 2 screws or more, and they will go to the comb, come over the comb, and go down the top of the stock all the way to the butt plate. There were several prominent craftsmen. The style probably was originated through the Bean family and the Gross family. They were early builders. They coined much of the style that we see, and it then developed through the gunsmiths in the southern part of the state, down around Chattanooga, Soddy Daisy area, and some of those would be the Hardens and the Clements, Enoch Harden.
Can you walk us through the examples of these rifles that you have here on the table and point out some of their significant features for us?
The rifle on top was manufactured by Baxter Bean. And Baxter Bean was the son of Russell Bean, who was the son of William Bean. And a little more history on that is William Bean was the original settler of Tennessee. His family, he was the first family that we give credit to moving his family to the frontier. And so he had several sons that were gunsmiths, and one was Russell. And Russell is the father of Baxter Bean. And Baxter Bean, we know, was in business by 1812 in Jonesboro with his father, Russell. And so this rifle is probably around 1820. And the style had evolved to what you see, still holding on to some Virginia characteristics here with the curl at the end of the trigger guard only beginning to form. But here we see a fully developed curl on the later rifle around 1865 or so by Ambrose Lawing, who was a gun maker in the Unicoi County area around Flag Pond, Tennessee. He and his father were listed in North Carolina as wheelwrights, and so they were making wagons, and the wheels, of course, were the most difficult part of that wagon to make, and so that was their trade. And we don't have evidence to prove it, but I feel like William Lawing was probably a gunsmith as well. And then his son Ambrose, who built this rifle, was a very prominent and good gunsmith. And he had, both of these men had good style, artistic style, as well as function. And Ambrose had a son who was named for his grandfather William, and he was also a gunsmith, as Baxter had a son named Baxter, who was also a gunsmith. Well, I've given you some of the characteristics, but some real true features is the quality of the ironwork. These southern gunsmiths were making the triggers, they were making the trigger guards, not casting them, so this is all forge work, and making the butt plates. And the only parts that were being bought commercially were the locks, and they were mostly English flintlocks of the period. And so it's one way we help identify the rifle, because the style seldom changed. It evolved into a smaller rifle, but as you can see, it stayed pretty much the same. These barrels are made of very soft iron, and while it's soft, almost dead soft, the rifles take a rifling very well, and they're very accurate. And so they were the most common tool that the frontiersmen would have to survive. And so these were made, many of them were carried all the way to the West Coast, and but many of them were used up right there in the area. Now we see similarity to a Hawken rifle from these rifles, and while the Hawken rifle had influence from English guns as well at the times, I feel like these guns coming to St. Louis probably had some influence on the Hawken style.
What brings you back to the Southern Mountain Rifle? Through all your years of collecting here, what keeps bringing you back to these?
Well, it's the utilitarian function and all being locally made by period gunsmiths. And so I guess it's the style that keeps me coming back.
Could you recommend or suggest any resources for somebody to look into, to getting or looking into to learn more about Southern Mountain Rifles?
Yes, there is a considerable literature base out there now, mostly produced from in the last 50 years or so. But there's a parts industry that supplies fairly accurately produced period-looking parts, so you can build a rifle that will mimic these pretty well. And the literature, these are not in any order, but Long Rifles of the Blue Ridge by Wayne Bryson has a lot of good period rifles from North Carolina, Western North Carolina. James Whisker has done a lot of work with documenting the gunsmiths and especially going through census tracking and data. A really nice book that should have Southern in the title is The Muzzleloading Rifle Then and Now by Walter Klein, and it's really a story of hunting in the southern Appalachian Mountains. And then Jerry Noble produced a four-volume set of books called Notes on the Southern Long Rifle. And that series of books has been excellent for anyone studying makers and builders, and he gives short descriptions of their life and history. So this is an excellent collection. And then here's a little picture book that I did a few years ago that just lists some good examples in color.
Any lasting thoughts you'd like to leave with viewers about the Southern Mountain Rifles?
Well, they represent a group of rifles far apart from the Pennsylvania guns, which become high art. These remain pretty well utilitarian pieces. We can count on one hand the high art pieces that were made as Southern rifles. There just weren't very many of them. I'm sure as the clientele became a little more wealthy and all, there were several made brass mounted, silver mounted, and a lot of really high art ironwork, but so few of those have survived, they don't even count or really influence the Southern rifle.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Randal, for sharing your knowledge and your passion for the Southern Mountain Rifle.
And thank you for the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
For more resources on collecting, research, high-quality photos, and more, visit KentuckyRifleFoundation.org. To get a taste of what the KRF offers with their extensive resource libraries, visit the Kentucky Rifle Foundation Facebook page. I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Kentucky Rifle Foundation for sponsoring this short series of videos. I'd also like to thank Randal for sharing his knowledge with you and future generations. Preservation of muzzleloading history like this is crucial for the continuation of American culture, and I'm happy to play my small part in preserving it for future generations.